Good afternoon, Scott Cahill, and this is a video about physics again. And a while back I had Nikola Tesla come in and he talked to me about some things regarding the transmission of light and gravity through space. And it was really nice to have Nikola in. And he and I agree on a lot of things. And I'm fairly comfortable with his methodologies of thought. Today I'm asking another guy to come by, and I'm not as comfortable. And it's not because of him, it's because of my own limitations as a mathematician. I'm not a great mathematician, and he certainly is. So I've asked Albert Einstein to stop by, and he has been wonderful to agree to it. So we're going to sit and we're going to talk. You know, I've got rather an odd philosophy about the transmission of gravity and light through space and other things. And there are a lot of things which stand in the way of that. And I hope not to try to prove or disprove something, but to put additional thought on the table, if you will, available for people to think about. I certainly will not be the one to find the universal theory. If I had another lifetime to spend, I'd love to give it a shot, but I don't. I've only got this one. I'm well through it, and I've spent it building things instead of thinking about physics, which if I had another lifetime is probably the way it would be spent. I love physics, and I love the thoughts associated with it. What a great thing for the human mind to be able to fall outside of our universe and inside of our universe and find these beautiful corners, the beautiful simplicity of it all. What a magnificent thing, huh? Even to think about. Even to think about. Oh, here he comes. Please, come on in. Let me get you a chair. Albert, watch your step. Your hair looks funny today. Doesn't look like you combed it or anything. Women been running their fingers through your hair? That was in his younger days. That was definitely in your younger days. Albert, thank you very much for stopping in. Albert, like Nikola, has been dead a long time. So he's probably not as sharp as he was before he was dead. Now that he's dead, I don't know. We'll talk to him, we'll find out. Albert, I talked to Nikola, and let me kind of give you the background here so you know where I'm coming from. Talking about the ether of space, and I know that's a subject that you've spent some time thinking about and discussing. And during your initial work in the patent office on the theory of relativity, you set aside the ether, stating that it couldn't be measured and that it was an uncertainty. And so rather than deal with the uncertainty with a problem with so many variables, you simply set it aside and developed the theory of relativity, which is a valid theory in which I respect greatly, as I respect the 1905 work on the special theory of relativity. That said, it is the description of the actuality that I disagree with. I don't disagree with the mathematics. I don't disagree with the experimentation. It is the seeking of a universal, plausible, kind of backwards thinking here, and quite honestly, that's been one of my criticisms of you, is that mathematics sometimes drove your your hypothesis instead of the other way around. And math was done and has been since, quite frankly. And I'm not being critical here. I don't want you getting mad and walking away or anything. Okay, but math shows us things, and then we have been trying to develop hypotheses to make sense of the math, and that is exactly upside down scientific method. Math should be used to test hypotheses, not the other way around. But when one gets an unexpected result in mathematics, then it is not unreasonable to alter one's hypothesis in order to accommodate that result. That is not necessarily a bad thing. It can become that. And we've had some things, special numbers developed and things to explain things. And I don't know that they're incorrect. I just know that they're odd to me. And I have this systemic feeling that simplicity is a necessary element of developing the universal theory in the end. I think that when we find the things that make us finally understand all relationships, mass, energy, and matter, that they will be simple things. May not be simple to describe, but they will be simple things, as are most things of our universe. Kind of eroded a bit after 1900. And not coincidentally, when your work occurred. Okay, so my argument or my discussion with Nikola, and he and I rather agree on this. Nikola never really defined the ether of space. I cannot prove any of this, but my feeling is that it is a particulate mass, that it is whole and basically uniform, that it is expanding as a whole, the soup of space I call it, with the planets and stars and black holes and things floating within it. The whole is expanding, we know. I believe that the ether is trying to find its electrical equilibrium. I believe that the weak force, if it is so called, if it is indeed a weak force, within these atom-like components of the ether are still expanding toward equilibrium. And I believe one day they shall find it and then reverberate and find absolute equilibrium. I don't know what will happen then. There are a couple of things that must be assumed for my model to work, which are quite sensational. I admit that. One of those things is that the ether of space is collapsing into all mass. So a mass in space is absorbing rapidly the ether of space. When you developed your special relativity, there were a number of things about that are incredible also. One of those things is the consideration that the speed of light is an absolute regardless of position of the observer. That seems to fly in the face of Schrödinger and a number of other theorists. And it makes no sense to me, or it made no sense to me. Back in the days when I thought that photons were projected through space, which in fact is what I learned in high school when I was a boy. The double slit, of course, showed us that light is transmitted as a wave. Photons are real. We can measure them, we can find them, we can see them. With multipliers, we can measure them accurately. The problem that I had with it, well, there are a number of problems if there is no ether of space. You have made the statement that particularly special relativity is flawed if there is an ether of space. I disagree with that. I think that special relativity is valid. In a number of these experiments that seem to have disparity under the generally accepted consensus, seem to have some semblance of equity under my concept. Special relativity said that light transmits independent of the motion of the observers through space. And I do believe that to be true. I had a very difficult time with it as a young man. Now I see the transmission of light and gravity through space as a particulate exchange from orbit to orbit to orbit along the ether. The ether being the medium along which these waves are transmitted in all frequencies, so all of them. I believe that Nikola felt pretty much the same way about that, and I believe that is correct. There have been a number of measurements that have taken place that seem to be contrary to that concept. Michelson-Morley, with their floating mirrored structure, and then later on Kennedy, Thorndike, and these things define the warping of space, the warping of space-time, as you saw it. I do not. I see time as a constant. I understand the mathematical realities of that, but I see time as an overbearing constant throughout. It matters not to me where that time is measured. The warping of space that you saw as a matrix of space, the displacement of the stars after World War I, the observation, and a number of other things, proved the mathematics. But also, my concept also proves the mathematics. And I think that's important as we develop hypotheses, because we kind of got ahead of ourselves with your work mathematically. And we got behind ourselves with the rest of it. And that is a great compliment to you. You were probably too good of a mathematician. I feel, and these are hard things to describe, but I feel that any mass has the ether of space collapsing into it rapidly. The reason that I feel this, there are a couple, but the primary reason that I believe this to be realistic is that it brings in the theory of special relativity. It also brings in the measurements that were done. You cannot ignore the measurements looking for the ether, which apparently failed to find the ether, and they did that by projecting light out and having it return on two different elements, 90 degrees apart, floating on wood sled on a pool of mercury. The speed of the Earth through the ether against straight out, straight back should have measured a differential and did not measure sufficient differential. Then further work was done, as I say, in Cleveland, Ohio at Case Western Reserve, Michelson-Morley, and there was another group. Nobody likes to do things by themselves in physics, except me. Maybe that says something about me. I don't have any friends. Kind of like Tesla that way, at least. And there was no phase shift. There was no Doppler effect in the differential of the wave frequencies. So the thought was, Therefore, there can be no ether of space because we'd be moving through the ether of space. I still believe that there is an ether of space, and I do believe that it is not stagnant to the position of the Earth, of course. The ether of space is moving outwardly from some center. The probability of it being the center of our Earth is infinitely improbable. Therefore, the ether of space is moving by our planet. However, with a high velocity absorption of the elemental ether of space itself into our Earth, which I believe creates gravity itself from the electrical resistance of the particular matter of the ether through the bodies which are held onto the Earth and between bodies that are pulled together. Imagine two massive bodies, each pulling from the ether between them. So this is what I believe creates gravity. This works with the square of the distance between the objects in a gravitational situation. And it works, as I've said before, with the square of the distance decrease in intensity of light. Both of those things being particular transmission through the ether of space. So I do believe that there's a curvature of space around mass, but I believe that that is actually these, if you will, flux lines of the ether being depressed by this absorption by the mass. And this makes all of this make great sense to me. It is, in any case, even if I'm completely wrong, which I certainly may be, but what I have looked for since I was very young, 10 and 11 years old, was a way to understand particularly gravity, but also the transmission of light. When Einstein came up with the speed of light through space, it doesn't work with my Newtonian mindset. It doesn't work for me that I can't be moving nearly the speed of light and shine a light, and that light won't be going nearly twice the speed of light. So I had to understand that. I had to look for a way that I could describe that would make sense to me. And although it's not an overly simple thing, of course, this makes that make sense to me. So this is what I've centered on, that I've worked a bit on, that I consider a plausible, viable way that this may be happening. There's been some, and we talked about this when I was talking to Tesla, and I do know these guys aren't here. So if there's anybody who thinks that maybe I'm imagining these things, I'm not really. It's just a way of being able to talk about these things. There's some discussion of a slowing of the speed of light through space. Imagine, if you will, a couple of things. First one is, imagine that our universe is indeed expanding, and imagine that there is an ether. So consider it a particulate ether. Well, call each space a cell, if you will, within this ether, the whole. As this tries to reach equilibrium, it moves the stars and the galaxies outward. Also, the space would become greater. As the space became greater, the cellular space of these electrical bonded elements of the ether, then the transmission times would become slightly greater. So this works with that experimentation as well. It seems a plausible thing. Imagine this also. Imagine that this is the ether and that this is a mass. And as this ether is sucked into this mass, it warps it like that. Very much like diagrams we've seen many times of the theory of special relativity, the warpage of space-time. Now, as this occurs, whether it's space-time or the ether of space, and say that you could migrate through it, fly through it in a straight line, then as you moved through that curved relationship of the matrix of space, of the ether, whether you use the A or not, then you would actually be traveling a farther distance from point A to point B across this curvature of the ether of space. I believe that a valid way to deal with the real measurements we've made, proving Einstein's theory of special relativity. So that if you simply take the concept of an elemental ether and replace that with the concept of a space-time in the theory of special relativity, I believe, and I have not tested all of these, and I am a terrible mathematician, so don't believe anything I tell you about my own math, but I believe you're going to come up with many of the same proven mathematical models describing this. So that's my thought, Albert. That's where I'm coming from. What do you think of that? He's just running his fingers back through his hair and it's sticking out really far. He's looking pissed off and puzzled. Is he Deutsch? No, not saying anything. Albert's nodding. He's just nodding. Like this. The good news, Albert, is that if something else like this is correct, one of the things about the entirety of the concept is that it doesn't abandon the realities of what we know mathematically and otherwise by experimentation of the theory of special relativity. It fits within them. So therefore, anyway, I wanted to get Einstein's opinion of it because I had Tesla in, and that was very helpful. And I thought that Albert also would be very, very helpful. And we also, when I talked to Tesla, we talked about the use of c squared as the square of the speed of light, and I questioned that. And Tesla questions math as a drive to the scientific method. I do too, quite frankly, Albert. I'm not being critical here. So don't be upset with me, please. Alrighty, that's kind of it. So we got Einstein's opinion too. We already had Tesla's opinion. Can't imagine who else I could call. Albert doesn't even have a cell phone. I had to call him on a home phone. Really hard to get a hold of. Thank you very much, guys.